This first video has nothing to see, only darkness. Put the phone down, take a seat. If you're in a rush, wait until you're in bed, and listen. If you think the United States runs the world's most formidable intelligence machine, think again. Today's story is about a deception so uncanny it feels almost supernatural. An operation that outstripped the limits of imagination. It hinged on a spy who sacrificed what most men would never dare to give up, and he kept the ruse alive for 20 years. Our protagonist isn't a single person, but a force: Chinese intelligence. They outwitted the entire French security apparatus and slipped into the private life of a French official for 2 full decades. Because of that breach, secrets leaked, secrets that helped bend the arc of the world we live in now. The tale begins in 1964, beneath the heavy sky of the Cold War. The planet seemed to hold its breath, bracing for the thunderclap of a nuclear catastrophe that could come at any moment. Beijing, then, was a closed city under the iron order of the ruling party, isolated in the most literal sense. Few dealt with it, fewer still traveled in or out. Then came a jolt. French President Charles de Gaulle decided to break China's isolation and formally recognize the People's Republic of China. France became the first major Western power to establish full diplomatic relations with Beijing. That announcement rattled the pillars of France's allies. France belonged to the Western camp, aligned with the United States, Britain, Australia, and Japan. And yet, from seemingly nowhere, it extended a hand to a pillar of the opposing bloc. The move felt bizarre, provocative. What could France, already a heavyweight, really gain from a relationship with China, a nation straining to great power status? To some, it looked like France was squandering its standing. Paris ignored the grumbling and pressed on. In 1964, the French embassy in Beijing opened its doors. It hosted cultural evenings and receptions that drew diplomats, officials, and notable figures from both countries. Rooms murmuring with music, clinking glasses, and the quiet currents of ambition and curiosity. At one such gathering, something began, softly, almost innocently, that would grow into one of the most audacious, emotional intelligence deceptions of the entire Cold War. And I do mean emotional. This isn't a story of silenced pistols and trench coats. It's a story of hearts, longing, and lies so intricate they felt like silk, beautiful to the eye, treacherous to the touch. There, amid polite laughter and warm lamplight, the third secretary of the French embassy, a young diplomat named Bernard Boursicot, met a Chinese opera singer. A glance became a conversation became a connection. The kind of connection that slips past a person's defenses and takes root where reason can't reach. No matter how far your imagination runs, you won't guess the ending of this story. What unfolded wasn't about missiles or battle plans, it was about trust. How it's won, how it's twisted, and how it can change the fate of nations. To feel the ground under their feet, picture the mid-60s, the Cold War like a volcano straining at its seams. On one side stood America and its allies. On the other, the Soviet Union with China nearby in the same shadow. The world was split cleanly into 2 camps, 2 tectonic plates grinding against each other. And on a quiet evening in Beijing, at a glittering embassy party, a fault line opened beneath 2 lives and began to move. Both blocs clawed for dominance without firing a shot. No jets screaming overhead, no tanks on the streets, no soldiers massing at borders. So, how did they fight? Through proxies and through spies. Nations in that era were willing to do almost anything to learn what the other side was thinking and planning. Intelligence services left no tool unused, even the cheapest and most dangerous of all, human emotion. China in particular had a reputation for inventive tradecraft. The country had staggered out of calamity, invasion, civil war, and a catastrophic famine that by some accounts claimed tens of millions of lives. Imagine living in a place where loss like that becomes part of the air you breathe. After such ruin, survival can harden into resolve. Out of that crucible, a cultural revolution rose under Mao Zedong, and China began, step by halting step, to stand upright again. Its ambitions were vast. To join the ranks of great powers, it would have to master the silent battlefield of espionage. Across the continent, France had its own scars. The Second World War had battered its economy and infrastructure, and the aftershocks of decolonization, like the hard-fought Algerian independence of 1962, left the nation reorganizing its influence and identity. Paris, too, would have to compete in the unseen war of information, which brings us back to the French embassy in Beijing, the chandelier-lit crossroads where officials, artists, and power brokers drifted from conversation to conversation. Bernard Boursicot worked there as the third secretary. Don't let the title fool you. He wasn't some idle paper pusher. He handled daily diplomatic administration, coordinated activities between the embassy and ministries back home, wrote reports, and analyzed political currents. He gathered timely information on China's internal developments and foreign relations, then dispatched his findings to the French Foreign Ministry. The critical edge of Bernard's position was proximity. He worked under senior diplomats, sat in on high-level meetings, and overheard conversations where sensitive plans were discussed, what Paris hoped to attempt with Beijing, how policies might shift, which doors might open or close. He was also the embassy's eyes on the street. Rhythmic investigative tone at 100% speed. Bernard listened for rumors about the ruling party, tried to gauge public satisfaction, or fear, felt the rhythms of daily life. Were traders complaining about shortages? Was there a sudden surge in demand for certain goods? Were the rail lines humming, the ports busy? Calm, summative tone at 100% speed. Every mundane detail could hint at the machinery of a rising economy. Dramatic, crisp tone at about 95% speed. Emphasis on informant, in a well-cut suit. In short, he was an informant in a well-cut suit, chauffeured, polished, and perfectly placed. Low foreboding tone at about 95% speed, pause before, tilt. And then, in 1964, at one of those glittering embassy soirees in Beijing, the careful balance of his professional distance and human longing was about to tilt.
His mind drifted toward one person only, the Chinese opera singer he'd noticed at that reception. Shi Pei Pu, the other lead in our story. The moment Bernard saw her, something inside him jolted. She was beautiful, her features calm, her presence quietly magnetic. As he later described it, one look was enough to convince him he had to speak with her, anything to open a line between them. He had no idea that meeting would rewrite his life forever. She, let's call her She, bewitched him with elegance and that resonant operatic voice. In those days, opera was a mark of refined culture, an easy pass into influential circles. That meant she moved effortlessly among notables and diplomats, admired on stage and off. She truly was talented, and when Bernard finally approached her, his fascination only deepened. She spoke with a cool confidence and a veil of mystery that drew him in like tide to shore. They agreed to see each other again, and again. Now you're probably thinking, so she was a spy. Case closed. Not so fast. The story is only just beginning. Yes, she was part of a broader Chinese intelligence strategy, an elaborate network trained to gather secrets from Western diplomats and, when possible, recruit them. The surest path to a man, after all, runs straight through the heart. Emotional manipulation, love, desire, tenderness was a tool as sharp as any blade. Intelligence handlers saw Bernard's infatuation and seized their opening. Meetings multiplied, the tone warmed. What began as polite conversation turned into something layered and intimate. They exchanged gifts, then glances, then avowals. Love arrived, breathless and convincing. With love came an affair. About a year later, in 1965, she told Bernard she was pregnant with a boy. Measured sources differ on the child's name, calling him either Shi Dudu or Bertrand. Overnight, the affair became a bond. A family, something Bernard had been longing for, seemed to flicker into being. And with that promise, he became easier prey for secrets to be coaxed from him, one confidence at a time. Despite appearing natural and genuine, the relationship changed shape under the strain of Shi's pregnancy and Bernard's workload. He traveled constantly as a diplomat, meetings, conferences, ceremonies, while Shi had performances, and now a child to carry. It grew harder to meet. Still, Bernard held on. She was, after all, the mother of his child. Their emotional intimacy only deepened. He confessed his private worries, even professional frustrations. In a foreign land, far from home, she felt like sanctuary, someone who could absorb the ache of homesickness and the stress of the embassy's tight-lipped world. They often met in darkness. Bernard later said the shadows made him feel safe, as if the night walled them off from the worlds of politics and espionage, leaving only the warm closeness of two people.
At first, the plan was simple. She would present herself as the curious lover, attentive, affectionate, eager to understand the man she adored. She asked about everything, the way any partner might. How was your day at work? How does life in China feel? Do you feel safe here, given your position? Ordinary questions, disarming in their warmth. They didn't set off alarms. If anything, they made Bernard feel seen. That kind of gentle curiosity builds a hidden bridge, softens the instinct to keep secrets. You answer once, and the next time it's easier. Then easier still. Before long, you're confiding things you never meant to tell anyone. It's a well-known method in the psychology of espionage. Chip away at the inner gate until the lock turns by itself. She used another tactic, too. She appeared and vanished from Bernard's life like a tide. Their contact was never constant. The interruptions made him cling harder while conveniently serving her handler's aims. Bernard convinced himself the rhythm was healthy. Two busy lives, maintaining room to breathe. Part of him even liked it. He had work to do, after all. But the distance also stoked longing. He asked to see her more. She demurred. The pregnancy, she said, was difficult. Her health kept her home. She never demanded he come. She knew his time was precious, his position important. Her restraint only deepened his tenderness. Then came the day she arrived with a child. "This is your son," she told him. "Dudu to some, Bertrand to others. If you can't acknowledge him, I understand. You're a diplomat. Don't pressure yourself." Bernard felt something settle in him like a ship finding harbor. A family. It was what he'd wanted without admitting it. He told her he understood the hardship she'd faced alone during the pregnancy, that he loved her, that he wouldn't abandon her or their child. He recognized the boy as his son. A new chapter opened. Because of his position, Bernard had access to sensitive files, briefings on the texture of Sino-French relations, Western policy toward Beijing, and the rumor-laced undercurrents that never make the newspapers. Exactly the kind of material Chinese intelligence valued most. He spoke to Shi the way a man speaks to the mother of his child, unguarded, relieved to drop the mask. He didn't realize he was parceling out secrets. Years into the affair, with Shi woven into every corner of his life, the requests tightened. Her questions shifted, friendly curiosity turning into subtle probes. What were the goals of today's meeting? Which officials were there? How is France planning to position itself in Asia? What's Paris's view of China's nuclear program? Guiding conversations toward policy, toward strategy, toward the rooms where decisions are born,
Bernard answered, carelessly, trustingly, offering up high-value intelligence without imagining the consequences. Through Xi, Chinese handlers learned that France was monitoring China's nuclear development and trying to judge whether Beijing intended to claim a seat among the great powers. They heard that Paris itself wasn't sure how to define the relationship, ally or adversary, partner or problem. From Bernard's confidences, they sensed a double game, words leaning one way, actions another. With that knowledge in hand, China could shape the board rather than merely play on it. And Bernard, loving, loyal, oblivious, never noticed the weight of what he'd set in motion.
Xi began to seed a careful illusion right in front of Bernard. China was harmless, even fond of France. At receptions and meetings, handlers planted people who, within earshot, would sigh over how small and peaceful China's ambitions were. No plans against France, no edge to their nuclear work, nothing but a modest, civilian program. The performance worked. Paris relaxed its guard and exported civilian nuclear technology, small pieces that nonetheless helped accelerate China's energy program. In short, Beijing played meek to get what it needed. Xi kept drawing information from Bernard, who met with whom at the embassy, what was discussed behind closed doors, which Western officials were pressing what agendas. From him, they learned that France intended to expand trade across Asia. China moved fast, flooding regional markets with goods priced below French offerings. Intelligence, in the right hands, becomes a lever. Beijing pulled it. Then a new figure stepped onto the stage, Kang Sheng. He asked to see Bernard, quickly, discreetly. When they met, he delivered a knife wrapped in silk. Xi's life, he said, was in danger. So was the child's. Certain party factions had noticed her connections to foreigners, to you, he told Bernard, and now suspicion curled around her name. If she didn't cooperate by providing information from him, the consequences could be fatal. You're the only one who can protect them, Kang said. What we need isn't much, documents of little importance, nothing that will make you a spy. The party merely needs to prove it can manage your relationship and guarantee there's no threat to one of its own. The subtext was blunt, help us or prepare to lose them. The unimportant documents were a foot in the door. Soon there would be another request, then another. Bernard understood he'd been drawn into a larger game and that he was alone in it. He felt the guilt like a weight in his chest. What he was doing betrayed his country, but the alternative, as Kang framed it, was unthinkable. He gave them what they asked for. It didn't stop. Chinese intelligence squeezed steadily. Each time a flow of information slowed, a new warning arrived. Sometimes Xi would vanish for a while. Word would come that she was under scrutiny, that her situation was precarious. Panic would push Bernard back into line. He bled out secrets by degrees. In 1982, he made a desperate move. He managed to get the boy, Dodu, out of China. 16 years old, Paris-bound. Xi followed. Bernard convinced himself the danger was at last over. It wasn't. Chinese intelligence in France still had eyes on him. At this point, the story might sound almost conventional. Cold War maneuvering, dossiers, and leverage. But what comes next belongs to a different register entirely, the part no one sees coming. And yes, France's vaunted services missed it for years. How? Infighting and factional squabbles at home dulled their edge. Rival parties, competing agendas, the machine faltered. While they argued, Bernard slipped through the cracks, carrying secrets he never meant to betray. Each ruling faction in Paris seemed to think differently. There was no clear policy, proof enough that while France labeled China a nuclear threat, it still sold Beijing civilian nuclear technology. The double standard was glaring. But once the damage was done, French intelligence finally snapped awake. By 1982, they were convinced leaks were flowing out of the embassy in Beijing and launched a full investigation 2 decades late. They shadowed the posted diplomats, mapped their movements and relationships, and summoned officials one by one for questioning. Among them was Bernard, fresh from Beijing, his partner, and the boy in tow. To the investigators, his affair with the opera singer was more than suspicious. They suspected she was the conduit, and as with all secrets, the day came when it unraveled. French counterintelligence pieced it together. She, Bernard's great love, had indeed been the operative feeding information. More than 500 official documents, not counting the whispers from private meetings. When they confronted Bernard, the floor fell out from under him. Was it possible that the home he imagined, the tenderness, the promises were all theater? That the threats to Xi's life and their child's were fabricated? They arrested him in Paris in 1982. Imagine it, the love of your life exposed as a spy, your reputation shattered, a family built on quicksand? Then came the shock that didn't fit inside any ordinary scandal. She had never been pregnant. The child Bernard believed was theirs had been purchased, obtained through a doctor in Xinjiang with help from Chinese intelligence. The revelation staggered him, but there was one more turn, the one no one saw coming. She was a man. Makeup, costumes, voice, and poise refined by the stage. For 20 years, Bernard had believed. You're probably asking the same questions he did. How could a relationship last so long without the truth surfacing? How could he not know? The answer lay in the choreography. Remember the darkness Bernard craved? The privacy that felt like safety? Their encounters were almost always at night, in shadow. In court, Bernard would later describe how the darkness became part of their ritual, a cocoon that seemed to insulate them from politics and espionage and, as it turned out, from the truth. He grew attached to that veil. It shaped what he felt, what he noticed, what he allowed himself to see. She was arrested in France as the investigation widened. Bernard suffered a profound collapse in custody, shock, humiliation, grief folding into one, and attempted to take his own life. He survived, left with questions that echoed relentlessly. How did my feelings mislead me so completely? Was every moment we shared a lie? Was I only ever a mark? The fallout didn't end with him. The blast wave from this deception was only beginning to hit everyone around them.
The scandal shook France. In 1983, the trial of Bernard and Xi became a global spectacle, broadcast, dissected, turned into a case study on how powerful states weaponize human emotion to harvest secrets. Public opinion split. One side saw Bernard as a naive victim caught in a colossal game of intelligence and seduction, someone who fell in love with a persona that never existed. The other viewed him as a tool in foreign hands, a man who betrayed his country, willfully or not, by following desire where judgment should have led. Bernard was sentenced to 6 years in a French prison. Yet the story twisted again. Both he and Xi received early release in 1987 after roughly a year amid diplomatic pressures and a storm of international attention. What leverage was applied, or what documents were quietly invoked, remains murky. Freedom didn't bring peace. Bernard withdrew from the world, living with regret and the heavy taste of shame.
He later shared his life with a partner named Thierry, a relationship that, according to investigators, had begun years earlier. He stayed in contact with Dudu, the boy he had once believed to be his son. Dudu settled in France and built a family of his own. She, meanwhile, leaned into the dark fame of the case, continuing a career in opera until his death in a care facility. When Bernard learned the news, he said, without ceremony, "Good that he's gone. He did so much to me without mercy. It would be foolish to pretend I'm sad. The plate is clean now. I'm free." The words were bare of tenderness, only the bitter residue of what had been lost. Bernard never fully escaped the feeling that he'd failed his country and himself. He lost his career, his standing, and the story he thought his life was telling. There are lessons here, sharp ones. Emotion can be turned into a weapon. The same feelings that make us human can be guided, amplified, and used to open locked doors. Blind trust is perilous. Affection without skepticism creates the perfect mark in a world that thrives on leverage. Psychological warfare outlives the Cold War. The contest wasn't only about missiles or machines. It was a campaign of perceptions, influence, and carefully planted narratives. That contest continues today, both online and off, through rumors, targeted manipulation, and data exploited for opaque ends. Information is the battlefield. Collecting it has never been easier. Abusing it has never been more tempting. The larger war over minds, over attention, over truth has no ceasefire. In the end, Bernard's story is a cautionary tale for everyone. Keep your heart open, but keep your eyes open wider.